Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Jason Lehman. I'm the marketing team lead here at Fishbowl Solutions. I have the privilege of introducing the webinar that'll be presented today, which is Quality, Safety, and Knowledge Management with Oracle WebCenter and ControlCenter. Before I introduce the speakers on today's webinar, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items with everyone. So today's webinar is being recorded, and every person that registered will be sent an email that includes a link where the recording can be viewed. We will also have a question and answer session at the end of today's webinar. And to ask a question, please type it in the Q&A box, which you should see either at the top or bottom of the Zoom application window. Go ahead and submit those questions throughout the webinar. All phones are muted, so this will be the only way to ask our speakers questions. Lastly, if you are experiencing any issue with the web portion of this webinar, because right now you should see the title slide for this webinar with the speaker names on the bottom. If you don't see that, there's something else you can try. So after clicking the URL to join link, which you should have received by email, you should have also seen in the lower right-hand corner of the window, which pops up, a button that says Launch Web Application. Clicking on that should get you to the webinar. For this webinar, Fishbowl is happy to be joined by Mike Ernst, who is the VP of Construction Operations at Ryan Companies. Hi, Mike.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
As Vice President of Construction Operations, Mike works to ensure consistency and effectiveness of operations across all of Ryan's regional offices. This involves both optimizing systems and processes, implementing initiatives, and utilizing the talents of Ryan's people effectively. Mike was a business sponsor and champion for this project. The other speaker today is Fishbowl's own Kim Negaard. Hi, Kim.
Hi, everyone.
Kim has been with Fishbowl for over 6 years now and currently is the product manager for ControlCenter. She was instrumental in the implementation of ControlCenter at Ryan Companies and worked closely with Mike on this project. So Mike is going to kick it off today and detail for us a little bit on who Ryan Companies is, as well as some background on the ControlCenter project. Then Kim will provide an overview of the overall solution at Ryan Companies. She will also do some show and tell and walk us through what Fishbowl did to implement ControlCenter and provide some examples of how it is being used today. And like I said earlier, we will take questions at the end. We will look to cover all of this in about 45 minutes, so let's get started. To start, I wanted to share just a little bit about Fishbowl Solutions and why we chose this topic for today's webinar. Fishbowl is a long-standing Oracle partner, and before that, Stellent, going all the way back to 1999 when we first started providing value-add consulting services around what is today known as WebCenter, or the Universal Content Management Platform. Our goal is to help customers solve costly and frustrating knowledge-sharing problems and enable them to get more out of their Oracle, Google, and PTC technology investment. As an Oracle WebCenter partner, we've worked closely with the product over the years and have identified numerous use cases where customers were looking to get a little bit more out of the product. A few of these areas include the overall user interface, workflow automation, and notifications based on content metadata. To hear how ControlCenter has helped Ryan Companies with all of these, as well as how better document control improve knowledge management at the company, I will turn it over to Mike and let him tell you more. Mike?
Great, thanks, Jason. So I'll start with giving you a quick little background about Ryan if you're unfamiliar with us. So Ryan is a full-service commercial real estate firm. We focus on providing solutions from, I always call it from idea to disposing or sale of a building. So we have development services that can help you find the land. We have design services that can help you with that aspect. We obviously construct a project, and then we can manage it and help you sell it after everything's done. So as far as terms, just so you can understand the scale of what we do, if you're familiar with ENR, we rank number 51 on that out of the top 400. We do about 1.5 billion in revenue a year, and we have about 1,200 employees. So you can see why knowledge management is a big key moving forward. as far as some of the reasons why we went on a knowledge management expedition, we started a couple years ago, but the reasons why are up on the screen here. Really, we had a changing landscape over the past few years. We have, as many companies do, a lot of people that are going to retire in the future. They're taking knowledge with them as they go out the door, and we want to be able to mine some of that. We definitely have a generational shift in the makeup of Ryan companies, with a lot of millennials coming in with different expectations and work styles of how they do it, as well as we've been growing. So you can see 41% of our workforce has started in the last 2 years. So we have a lot of new people that we are trying to bring on board. Some of the reasons why we have a critical focus on knowledge management, you can see, is direct expense. That really is what it comes down to in trying to be efficient with our business. We have a lot of processes, policies that I'm sure most of you guys have too. And sometimes when different regions or different people reinvent that process, that's a lot of wasted effort, a lot of wasted time. We tried to measure that on a per project basis. And you can see that that's 16,000. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when you take that across 200 to 250 jobs that we do each year, it adds up. The other one that's out there is an example that I'll give you where we are using old content. And this is kind of a case study where we have rates. As you guys may charge rates, billable rates for your labor out to people. We have a situation where people were using old rates, and immediately by using these old rates, we were discounting the cost and the value of our service to our customers by the tune of $25,000 a project. So that adds up over time as well. And then the last one, which is a soft number, but I think a lot of you can appreciate when you have to switch employees and when you can't keep that retention high, there's a big expense that goes with it. We usually estimate that at about 3 times the cost of the current person's salary. That is filled up by headhunters and search efforts to find people, but it also includes missed production, the person leaving, and the onboarding time that it takes to get somebody up to speed and feeling productive over time. So before we get to ControlCenter, some of the pain points that we were experiencing, you can see up on the screen. I won't read through all of them, but there are a lot of ones that I'm sure all of you are feeling as well. Specifically, we had multiple repositories of where this information sat, and people had a hard time finding it. It could be in different locations, whether it's in a database or network folders. We have a lot of different departments and regions, and people were reinventing these copies. There was no true ownership of anybody for a piece of information, and so it would get out of date, and there would be multiple copies of that floating around. We also found ourselves struggling with trying to find information since it was so scattered across the Ryan universe that people couldn't find what they needed. So the rest of them you can read, but that really was it, is we had out-of-date, inconsistent, hard to find information as we started a couple years ago. So why are we changing now? I mentioned the changing landscape. You know, we talked about growth and the retirees coming up and the change of generations. That's a big piece of it. But really, we're always trying to achieve that financial value. I mentioned some of the costs that we were expending through waste, but we are trying to limit that, right? We know that some of those will exist, but we're trying to limit that, specifically bringing people up to speed faster, because if they can find information, they can find information that they trust, was one of our main goals. So that onboarding process was huge for us. We also want to make sure that we can share information when we're dealing with multi-departmental or multi-regional teams that get formed. If they are all starting from a common piece of information, common knowledge, common policy or practice, then they can engage a lot faster. And so that time savings is an immediate benefit to Ryan and ultimately to our customers. We also have strategic goals out there that we're trying to achieve. Specifically, when I talked about the background of Ryan, you can see that we deal with the entire life cycle of the real estate process. And so that flow of information in a consistent manner across all those different departments and different disciplines is huge for us. That is a strategic focus for us. Mitigation of risk, I think you guys all understand this. I've talked about waste a couple of times. Sometimes it's not just time waste that you have. Sometimes that if you have information that's out of date, that can manifest itself in ways that you don't want to see and have direct effect on you. Specifically, if we had an issue with quality, or it showed up in a warranty issue that we had with one of our buildings, if we didn't capture that information and share it with the rest of the company, we could make that same mistake again. And so sharing lessons learned and looking back at that information is huge for us. It's fine to make a mistake once. You don't want to make it twice. We always want to have a competitive advantage if we can get our speed of response back to our customers up and increased. They always appreciate that. They also like the idea that if they're dealing with one of our regions, let's say in the north here, I'm in Minneapolis, if they're dealing with that, they want to have that same experience if they're working with our Phoenix office. And so having some of that continuity of service and deliverables that we can capture by having good, solid, single source of truth information available to them makes a huge difference, and honestly makes us look much better. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kim, and she's going to kind of walk through what we did about all those items and how we got to today.
Thanks so much, Mike. So like Mike said, I'm going to walk through kind of an overview of the approach that we took for the project, some of the pieces that were in play. And then after we do that, I'm going to actually do kind of a show and tell and let you see a few of the capabilities that we put in place and how that's actually working for Ryan Company. So if we take a step and look at the high level overview of what this project all entailed, there's a few pieces. The first is the software. So there's two pieces of software that were in play for this solution. The first one was Oracle WebCenter Content. Mike kind of alluded to this, that Ryan already had a number of systems in place, and Oracle WebCenter Content was one of those many systems. And so Oracle WebCenter was chosen as the system to be the new home for all the corporate knowledge and be that one place that everything will be stored. The second piece of software that's in play was ControlCenter, and ControlCenter is an application that Fishbowl built several years ago, and it really extends WebCenter Content to give it a better user experience, make it mobile responsive, and allow it to have better appeal for everyone from baby boomers to millennials, and at the same time add some functionality that's specific to knowledge management needs. And we'll take a little closer look at that in a couple of slides. But those are the two pieces of software that were in play for this project. And then in terms of actually making it a reality, there was a number of services that were required to do that. So Ryan worked with Fishbowl and our implementation team to put this project in place. So that involved first upgrading Oracle WebCenter Content. WebCenter had been in use at Ryan in the past, but as they were looking to really increase adoption and roll it out on a much broader scale, they wanted to go ahead and make sure they were on the latest version. So we upgraded them to 12C, and then we did all of the configuration activities within both WebCenter and ControlCenter based on their requirements. So things like setting up workflows, creating metadata fields, creating all of the rules and profiles that go along with that to get it working the way that it needed to. And then the last piece of the Fishbowl services is actually related to ControlCenter. So similar to Oracle WebCenter, the way it's extendable through custom components, many of you may be familiar with, we architected ControlCenter so that it can also be extended through customization. So as part of this project, we added several pieces of functionality specific to Ryan's needs, which included the ability to manage manuals, which I'll talk about, the ability to have project-specific copies of documents and maintain those associations, and then to navigate the system visually using Ryan's lifecycle framework, which I will also show you an example of that in a little bit. And then lastly, I certainly have to mention the importance of having a committed project team on the Ryan side. Obviously, here at Fishbowl, I work with a lot of different customers, and we've done a lot of projects in the last, almost 20 years, and it's always so important to have committed resources and a committed project team on the client side, and Ryan definitely had that to do things like define requirements and set priorities, not only up front, but throughout the project to be involved Ryan was already undergoing a cleanup process before we even got involved to make sure that as they're rolling out a new knowledge management system, the content that they're putting in place is updated and valuable and that users can trust it when it goes live. And then, of course, to be the champion for this as they're rolling it out to many departments and regions, having that strong support from Mike and others on the Ryan team. So that's really the software and resources and kind of solution overview, but I thought it would also be helpful to take a look at the scope of the actual documents that were being managed as part of this project. So I divided that up into 3 categories. The first is corporate knowledge, and that's really the policies and procedures, checklists, supporting resource kind of documentation, training content that Ryan is managing. But as Mike alluded to, they do 200, 250 projects every year. So it's not only managing the master copies of all of those content items and the master templates and the master procedures, but also being able to create versions of those for specific projects and then maintain those associations. So in that umbrella of corporate knowledge, it's both the master copies of all of those things as well as versions of those that have been created for individual projects that Ryan is working on. The second category is what we're calling assembled manuals or assembled documents. And these are really documents that are made up of other documents. So you can see a few examples, things like quality assurance manuals and safety manuals. Those apply to different projects that Ryan's doing. And then, of course, an employee handbook, which applies to the actual team members at Ryan. And if you think about something like an employee handbook, it probably contains a couple dozen policies and procedures. There might be some checklists for coming on board or a couple of different forms that you have to fill out. That handbook is really made up of a lot of other managed documents. And that's what the manuals capability and the manual content that we're managing as part of this project really is. And then the last category is what we're calling real estate archival. And Mike mentioned how Ryan manages buildings, all the way through their life cycle, and that WebCenter was already in use in some pieces of Ryan companies, and real estate was actually the primary group that was already using WebCenter content before this project. Obviously, with real estate management, there's a lot of transactional content, there's a lot of contractual documents that need to be managed, and those have different structured elements around them, expiration dates, tenant details, addresses, things like that. So WebCenter was a good fit for that kind of document management. And so as part of this project, we migrated all that existing content into their new 12C environment. We added some additional capabilities around automation of notifications and things like that. And so as you look at the project as a whole, these were really the 3 categories of things that were being managed. So I know some of you on the call are very familiar with Oracle WebCenter. Others of you are newer to what is WebCenter, what is WebCenter content. I thought it would be helpful to just briefly kind of overview what it is and why Ryan companies decided that this tool was a good fit to be the back-end infrastructure for this knowledge management project. So as I said, it was something that Ryan already owned. So obviously there are overhead advantages and license cost advantages to going with something that you have versus buying a whole another technology that now you have to support and maintain. WebCenter is very well suited to document control, knowledge management, because of the flexible metadata that you can set up, the different kinds of document profiles. So being able to set up, one way to control policies and procedures, another way for manuals, another way for real estate documents. The flexibility to do that in WebCenter makes it really well suited to this kind of a project. And then it has a lot of the things that you would expect in any enterprise class content management system: robust version control, single source of truth, flexible security model, and then of course workflow. So workflow is something that comes built into WebCenter content, the ability to create workflows and route documents through review cycles to different people. This is something that Ryan wasn't using prior to this project. So as part of this knowledge management project, Fishbowl helped them define what that could look like and put those workflows in place. And then lastly, because of the way that WebCenter is architected, it's also well suited to be able to integrate with other applications that you might have in place. And in Ryan's case, one example of that was Oracle JD Edwards, which is Ryan's ERP. And so as part of this project, there are several integration points between their knowledge management platform and JD Edwards, including whenever someone wants to put in a project-specific document. Obviously, there are customer names and numbers and project names and numbers. And so being able to start typing that as they're checking a document in and be able to pull all that back from JD Edwards. If they're putting, leases in, it's going to be able to integrate with the tenant information, addresses, things like that automatically. And then lastly, because of the link structure and the single source of truth that WebCenter provides, even if all the documents are stored in WebCenter, it makes it very easy to provide links to those documents from other places like intranets and learning management systems, which are two of the places that Ryan Companies is linking these documents. So when we mentioned the software at the first slide of the approach, WebCenter was one piece and ControlCenter was the other. And I know ControlCenter is probably something that many of you are less familiar with. So I thought I would briefly mention what it is and then look at why Ryan chose to use this as part of their solution. So ControlCenter is a product that Fishbowl developed several years ago, and it's an add-on for WebCenter content. So it sits on top of an existing WebCenter content deployment. The documents are stored and maintained within WebCenter content, but ControlCenter really provides a dedicated user interface, and you can see a screenshot of that here on the right for accessing that content. It provides an interface that's much more user-friendly. It's mobile responsive. It appeals to everyone from baby boomers to millennials who are really expecting a more updated, easy-to-use place to manage their documents. And then it also provides additional features that WebCenter doesn't have out of the box that specifically address use cases like document control, knowledge management, compliance, audit, such as the ability to have reoccurring review cycles, enhanced watermarking, more proactive notifications. So there's a number of things that ControlCenter brought to the table that you couldn't do or you couldn't do easily with WebCenter content out of the box. So as far as why that was important for Ryan Companies, I think it's helpful to look at why it's important for different people who are going to be interacting with this knowledge management platform. First of all, for all the users in general, ControlCenter brought a much better user experience. And in terms of Ryan Companies, as I said, had WebCenter in place before this project, and it was really used in just little pockets of the company. And one of the reasons for that was generally the impression was the user experience wasn't great. It was hard to use. There wasn't a lot of excitement about wanting to expand the use or put more content in there. So by bringing ControlCenter in, it really updates that user experience and encourages adoption. It also helps create that one place where documents are easy to find. So not only is it a single source of truth, but once you check things in, once you put documents into the system, it's easy to find them and use them and reference them in the future. The second category of users for the system is going to be the authors. So the people who are actually responsible for adding documents, making changes, reviewing changes, really the subject matter experts in all these different areas across Ryan Companies. And so for them, there's several things that this project brought that they didn't have before. One is the ability to manage these manuals, so these assembled pieces of content where in the past they would have to go find all these things which would be scattered around potentially in network shares, or some of them might have been in WebCenter, some of them might have been in SharePoint, find them all, create PDF copies, go into Acrobat, stitch them together. If one of them changes, then they have to go, first of all, be aware that there was a change, and second of all, know to go make an update. So obviously it was very tedious and also prone to human error. So being able to make all of that automatic was a big win for the document authors. And then in addition, being able to have this relationship between the project-specific copies that get created and the master version of those documents. And that really helps the institutional knowledge at Ryan flow both ways, because the people who are creating the project-specific copies are always directed back to the master as the place to start. But at the same time, the authors who manage and who own those master documents, when it comes time that they need to update them, maybe on their yearly basis, they can easily see all these variations that have been created, and any of those changes that make sense, they can ripple back up into the master. And then the last group of users is really management. And from a managerial or administrative perspective, obviously a big concern is the accuracy and the trustworthiness of the content. Mike mentioned, risk mitigation and the operational efficiencies that are created by having the right processes in place. So with this project, looking at, how do we ensure that when changes are made, they're vetted before they're released, and that the right subject matter experts are looking at the documents and saying, yep, this looks right before it's released. So ControlCenter helps make that easier and more streamlined. And then it also adds the ability to schedule those documents for reoccurring review so that you don't get into a position where you go live, everything's good, but then nobody looks at it for 5 years and suddenly you have lots of out-of-date content. ControlCenter allows them to, kind of be proactive about those review cycles and queue things up for review on a regular basis. So the last thing I wanted to mention before we dive into the show and tell is just give you a little bit of an idea of how different users at Ryan might actually interact with the system on a daily basis. As Mike and I have both mentioned, this is really a project that went across departments and across roles. So just to give you a few examples of that, one might be QA inspector, quality assurance inspector, would go into ControlCenter and they would get a master copy of an inspection checklist. And they would take that copy and they would tailor it and check it in as a project-specific copy for the building they're going to be inspecting. So it could be, if they're doing interior work, maybe they don't need to inspect a roof. Or it could be they're doing something cool and new that Ryan's never done before. And so now there's different kinds of things that they need to inspect and adding that to the checklist. And now that's in place to push back up to the master the next time they make changes. Another example is real estate management. Obviously, there's a lot of documents involved in managing buildings that have expiration dates, things like leases and insurance. So let's say an insurance contract is coming up for expiration. ControlCenter is going to proactively notify the appropriate real estate managers at Ryan companies, and they're going to be made aware of that upcoming expiration so that they can decide what they need to do. Do they need to renegotiate the policy? Do they need to talk to the tenants about it? And so that's going to be something that's proactively addressed on a regular basis based on the management of all of those time-sensitive documents. The third one really ties right back to this idea of having a single source of truth and having one place to maintain important information. So in the case of marketing, if they need to publish updated brand standards or if they need to make branding changes across documents, they're going to go into ControlCenter and they're going to make those changes there. And so that's going to be reflected in the system where users are trained to go and look for information. It's also going to be reflected if any of those documents are linked on the intranet or in the learning management system as part of the onboarding process. All those documents point back to the single copy in ControlCenter, and those changes get reflected across the company. And then the last example has to do with the importance of having the right checks in place for changes to content. So people at Ryan who are really the subject matter experts on particular topics, it could be superintendents or safety managers. Let's say changes were made to a crane operation procedure. Those are going to get routed to these individuals. So they would log into ControlCenter and they would see, oh, I have something I need to review, and they would be able to easily open that up and make sure that everything looks good before they approve it to be pushed out for general use. So those are just a few examples of how different roles at Ryan might interact with this system. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you really a show and tell of several of the key features or capabilities of the system, how it's being used. The first one is the importance of easily finding content, so I'll show you how we're doing that. The second is ensuring the accuracy of the content and making sure that it is reviewed in a timely fashion. And then the third one is how we're doing the management of manuals, so these assembled documents, how we're doing that. So first of all, easily finding content. Obviously, if you have everything in a single source of truth, single place, but nobody knows how to find it, then it's not very useful. So findability was very important, and there's actually a number of ways that are available for users to be able to find content. And we'll take a look at each of these. The first is browsing, which is going to be the most kind of structured way to look for content. The second is doing Google searches, which is going to be the least structured, most kind of flexible, open way to look. We also have the ability to do advanced search or structured search forms. And then visual navigation is something that's pretty cool that we did specifically for Ryan based on their lifecycle framework. So I'll show you what that looks like. So what you're seeing here is the ControlCenter dashboard. And so when a user at Ryan Companies logs into ControlCenter, this is something like what they're going to see. And on the left-hand side, you can see this browse navigation. So this is, for those of you who are fairly familiar with WebCenter, this is all driven based on metadata. It's totally configurable, and you can choose the kinds of fields that you want to use. So if I want to drill down into corporate knowledge in order to browse through ControlCenter, I can do that. So I'm going to look at construction, drill down, and you see as I do this, the pool of documents that are available here continues to narrow. This is something that a lot of customers really like. if they want to provide a little bit more of that guidance to the users. Some of them who are coming off of SharePoint or network shares, think of this as sort of a virtual folder structure. We've also heard customers think about it as like a virtual table of contents if they're used to more of the 3-ring binder approach to managing this kind of policy and procedural documentation. But the benefit of this is, unlike a true folder structure or a true table of contents, you can have one single document show up in a bunch of different places. So you can see that a little bit here. I'm in this category and I can tell, you know, these documents are all also in that category, but you can see they're in multiple categories. So if I were to look at the proposal phase, I would also see this document. You can see the same is true for project phase. I can assign things to more than one, and so I can have them show up in all of the places that they're relevant, but for any given user, they can navigate the way that makes sense to them based on the job function that they have or the kind of information that they're looking for. So this is an example of the browse navigation. And here's a document, the Senior Housing Guide, VDC Senior Housing Guide. So this is one way to get to it. So let's take a look at the others. So the next example that I mentioned is keyword-based searches. We have an integration, ControlCenter integrates with the Google Search Appliance, which is going to provide really good relevancy for keyword-based searches. If you don't have a Google Search Appliance, this will also work with the built-in Oracle text search keyword quick searches that come with WebCenter Content. The idea here is really appealing to a lot of millennials, but users in general who just want to do a simple keyword search. I want to type in some words and I want to find what I'm looking for. And so that's what we're illustrating here. Again, if I search for senior housing, this is the same document that I found in the previous slide by using the browse navigation. A third way that you can search is through search forms. So again, if you're familiar with WebCenter Content and search profiles, WebCenter ControlCenter will integrate with search profiles. So I can come up to the search menu, I can choose, you know, I'm looking for corporate acknowledgement, I'm looking for a document. So if I choose that, it's going to bring me to my document search form. This is the search profile page with my various metadata fields. I can perform my advanced search with one or more of these criteria, and then I can do my search. Before I go to the next slide, I was also going to mention, you notice here I'm searching release documents, which is what most general users are going to want to do most of the time. And depending on their permissions, this may be the only option that they have. But in addition to that, ControlCenter also provides the option to search for documents that are in workflow or documents that are expired. So that's something that within the standard Oracle WebCenter interface, you don't really have a good way or any way to do. But within ControlCenter, it makes it very easy to do that. So if I do my title search for senior housing, perform my search, again, it's another way to get at that one single document. The last one we're going to take a look at is the visual navigation. So we're going to hop back over to the dashboard. This is a dashboard here, and I can see my visual nav right here. So it's kind of small. So if you click on that, it's going to make it bigger. And then within ControlCenter, you can choose any one of these boxes. So this is the framework that Ryan uses to show the life cycle of their delivery. So it goes all the way from initially pursuing a client through designing a building, actually constructing it, turning it over to the owners, and then the ongoing operation of that building and the management of that real estate. So you see that across the top. And then down the side, you see the different departments at Ryan who are involved in these different processes. So development, architecture and engineering, construction, real estate management, going down the side here. And so what you can do is you can click on any one of these boxes. So this one here that's highlighted in red says pre-construction meetings. So if I want to see all the documents that pertain to pre-construction meetings, which is in the pre-construction and construction intersection, I can click on this, and it's going to take me to all the documents within ControlCenter that are managed that have to do with those two phases. And so here I see the same document, the Senior Housing Guide, that we looked at through those other mechanisms to search. So again, it's all the same one single copy, but it's different ways to get at it. Now, if I click on this, and this is true if I clicked on it from any of those pages that we just looked at, it's always going to take me here. So here's my view document page. And from this page, I can, of course, view the actual web viewable document. But I can also see on the side, other information that might be relevant. I can see all the metadata based on the profile that's been set up. I can see the actions that I can take. So if I want to add this to my favorites, subscribe to it, make a change to it, check it out, things like that, I can do that from here. And if we scroll down a little bit, what's really cool is you can also see if you look at Ryan's overall life cycle framework, where in that framework is this document relevant? So I can see in this metadata that this document applies to the project phases of construction and design and pre-construction. So that's these two sections going this way. And then I can also see the departments that applies to our construction and A&E, which is architecture and engineering. So I can see that's, these two boxes here, and I can tell this is the place in the life cycle where this document would be relevant. And that's really an overview of the findability and how ControlCenter and Ryan is making it easy for all of their users to find relevant documents, and kind of being aware of the fact that different people might want to look for things in different ways at different times, but ultimately always bringing them back to that one, accurate, trustworthy source of information. The next thing I want to take a look at is, okay, so you have a lot of content and it's easy to find. How do we make sure that the content is actually accurate and that it is reviewed in a timely fashion? So there's a number of things that Ryan is doing to address this, both when new content comes in before it's actually released, and also after content has been released to ensure that it stays accurate. So let's take a look at that. The first thing is, before content is released, documents are all assigned an owner and a review interval. So right out of the bat, we know we have an owner assigned who's kind of the subject matter expert, and then we have a review interval so that in the future we know how often this document needs to be reviewed. Secondly, there's a gatekeeper, and this is a small number of kind of business administrators who are maintaining this system as a whole, and they're going to be responsible for validating all brand new documents that come into the system get categorized correctly, because as you saw, those categorizations help drive findability and making sure that things show up in the right places. In addition, owners are going to be routed to review all changes, both when new documents come in as well as ongoing updates to existing documents, and in any scenario where the owner doesn't take action in a timely fashion, that's going to be escalated to the gatekeeper. So the gatekeeper can either, review the document themselves, assign a new owner, or go hunt down the owner and find out, why they're not reviewing the document. So it won't just fall into a black hole. Then after the document is released, the scheduled review takes over. So the scheduled review interval, let's say it's a 1-year interval, 60 days out from that, it's going to assign it again back to the owner to take a look and say, is this still accurate or not? Again, if that doesn't happen, it's going to get escalated to the gatekeeper so that someone is taking a look at it. And then the last point is, watermarks are used for expired content. So in the scenario where someone doesn't take action when a document is due for review, we're not going to pull it out of use. It's going to stay in the system. But we're going to put a watermark on there to give users a heads up that, hey, this thing was supposed to be reviewed. It hasn't been, so proceed with caution because it might be outdated. So let's take a look at that. So if I come in and I'm going to add a new document, I can go here, I can choose corporate knowledge. I'm going to add a new document. Again, this is going to integrate with any of the check-in profiles that you might be using in WebCenter, and you have the option to expose all or some of those within ControlCenter. So I'm going to add a new document. Here's my check-in form. Like I mentioned, every new document that comes in is going to get an owner, and it's going to get a review interval. So you can see that here. Now, after I complete my check-in, this is going to get assigned to this owner to go and review it. So if I go back to the dashboard, the owner is going to see that on their dashboard they have something waiting for review. And when they open up that review, they'll also get an email about it. They'll be taken to this page. And so as the owner, I need to come in here. I need to make sure that this document looks good, that it's accurate. If I want to, get a copy of the native document or make any changes, I can do that at this point. Otherwise, if I think it looks good, I can approve it. Now, if this is a new document that's coming into the system for the first time, it's also going to go through the gatekeeper. So if I approve this, now it's going to go to the next step. Now the gatekeeper would get an email that would show up on their dashboard, and they would be asked to come in here and review it. It would also go to the gatekeeper in the scenario where the owner didn't take action and it gets escalated. So when the gatekeeper comes to review this for the very first time, they're really looking to make sure that it got put into all the right categories. So you can see some of that down here, that it got put into the right department, that it got put into the right construction phase, because that's going to drive that visual navigation. It's going to drive the browse navigation. And obviously that's important for the ongoing maintenance of the system. So the gatekeeper is going to take a look at that. If everything looks good, they're going to approve it, and now it's going to be released into the system. So other users can't search for it or find it. The general user base won't see it until it gets released. Once it's released, now it's available for discovery in any of those 4 search and find options that we showed. Now, once it's released, it's going to be used and people will be accessing it until that scheduled review time comes around. Then we take a look at the next step. So when the scheduled review comes due, the document stays in the system. Users can still search for it, they can still find it, but those individuals assigned as the owner will be asked to go review the document. So they're going to come in, again, it's going to show up on their dashboard, they're going to get an email. This review screen looks fairly similar to the one that we saw for workflow. But in this case, the first thing that they're really going to be asked is, does this document even need to be changed? So it's going to give the owner an opportunity to review it and decide if it needs changes. Because in some cases it may be fine and we need to just renew it for another year. Again, this is going to escalate to the gatekeeper if the owner doesn't take action within a defined period of time. So if I think as the owner that this document is still valid and it doesn't need any more changes, I can renew it for its next period. Alternately, if I think it needs to really be pulled out of the system because it is in fact obsolete, we don't need it anymore, you can approve the expiration and just let it expire. Or lastly, you can actually make changes, check it out, check it back in, and then those changes will be routed through the appropriate channels. So if I'm going to say this document's fine, it doesn't need any changes, I can click no change necessary. I'll be asked to put in a comment about what I'm saying. Now, in this case, it's been set up on automated review cycle. So if you remember when we added it, we said it's on a 1-year cycle. So when I submit this, it's just going to renew it for another year, and 60 days out from that new expiration date, it's going to get assigned back to the owner to take a look at it again. The last thing I wanted to show was, what happens if someone doesn't review it by the date that it's scheduled. And so in that case, we're going to use watermarks to mark that document. So it's still searchable, people can still find it, but it's going to have a notice just telling them, this document is expired, it was supposed to be reviewed, it hasn't been. So this is the owner if you have questions or need to talk to them about it. Otherwise, basically proceed with caution. And so those are the mechanisms that are in place to help ensure that the content coming in is accurate and that it maintains accuracy throughout its ongoing life cycle. The last thing I want to take a look at is the manual assembly. And so this is something that is pretty important for this project. Obviously, there's a lot of projects that Ryan does. Mike mentioned, 200, 300 projects a year. And for just about every single one of those, there needs to be a safety manual, there needs to be a quality manual. This has best practice implications, this has risk mitigation implications. In some cases, there's OSHA requirements that require Ryan to provide this kind of documentation to their workforce. And so previously they were doing this, manuals were very manual. Like I mentioned, you had to go find everything and put it together, and then if something changed, you didn't even necessarily know, or you had to go regenerate it. It was very tedious. And so we were looking to automate that. One example with the employee handbook would be something like the drug use policy. That's going to show up in the safety manual that gets published out and shared with clients. That's also going to show up in the employee handbook. So if that document ever changes, there's a lot of places where that should get updated, and that is a tedious process and also potentially prone to missing places where that should have gotten updated. So what we did for this is we allowed manuals to be managed as content items. And so when you add a new manual to the system, you can select from all the other documents which are already in WebCenter, in ControlCenter. You can put them in the order that you want. And then anytime any one of those documents changes, it's going to automatically regenerate the manual for you and check that in as a new revision. So you have all that history. You can always go back and see, what did this manual look like on January 1st, but you have that automatically created updates. And we do this both for master manuals, so things like the safety manual, you have a master safety manual, but then you also can create project-specific versions of that. So if there's certain safety practices that maybe don't apply to certain kinds of projects, you can take those out. You can create a project-specific copy of that manual. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So what I have here is an example of viewing a manual that was created. So I already would have gone in, I would have picked initially the documents to put in this manual and checked it in, which would go through the process of generating the compiled document. You can see on my cover page here, this was checked in December 2nd, and it has 32 pages. And here's my type of document. It's a corporate knowledge manual, so it's a master manual. If I go ahead and look at the detailed content information for this manual, I can see this tab here that tells me what is actually in the manual. So if I click on that, all of these documents are managed documents within the system that are contained within this manual. If I want to reorder them, I can drag them and move them around. If I want to remove them, I can do that. I want to add more documents to the manual, I can click this button here. And that's going to allow me to do searches, check the boxes for the documents that I want to add, and add them to the manual. Once I start making changes to the definition of what's in this manual, it's going to go into edit mode. I can do that multiple times, add more documents, change the order, and when I'm done, I can click Finish and Publish. And that's going to trigger the rebuilding of this manual. Now, that's different than if, say, the return to work policy gets updated, which was already in my manual. That's going to automatically trigger the manual to be regenerated without any action being required from the user. But if I actually want to go in here and edit what the manual is comprised of, I can easily do that from this interface and then click Finish and Publish, and that's going to go ahead and regenerate this compiled document. So I can see the after state for this particular manual. It has 392 pages compared to the original 32, and this was published on 12/8. And then again, I can see all the properties for the document. So that's really an overview of the manual generation process. I'm now going to turn it back over to Mike to give a little bit of info on how this project, the outcome after going live, and sort of the feedback they've heard and what's next.
Thanks, Kim. So everybody always wonders, like, when you roll out a new software, how did people take it? Was it easy to use or not? I'll tell you, it was extremely easy. Since we were trying to create a tool and working with Fishbowl to implement this tool that is very intuitive, we're always worried about that initial rollout. And as far as training goes, it was very light, very simple. I said that it took about 5 to 10 minutes per person, but really what we did is we sent out a 5-minute video to the entire company, showing the highlights of how to use the system, walking through the different methods of finding materials based on your preference, whether that be search or folder structures or the visual navigation. And then we followed that up by attending team meetings that were already scheduled and gave usually a 5 to 10 minute demo and took on questions. And the responses were great. You can see, actually, I put a couple of the tutorial or testimonials that we got from some people about how intuitive it was and what they're finding very useful. The other thing I'll actually mention, just because it's relevant and on my mind right now, we only went live with this 3 months ago, and in that time frame, Ryan actually went through its annual employee survey, and I was just reviewing the results last night, and there were multiple comments, positive, about how easy the tool was to use and how it's helped people find their way, and that's both people that have started at Ryan recently as well as been here for years and find information they need. So it was nice to see that in that immediate impact, that in just a couple months, a few months, people were even willing to put it on an employee survey as a good thing. So the other one, the second bullet point there, is content owners are now aware of the out-of-date information that's out there. You'd be surprised, probably in your companies, how many people think that they're going off of the current information, and that includes the subject matter experts. And so by centralizing this and going through a cleanse and purge process that's natural by implementing ControlCenter, we were able to at least put those subject matter experts on notice of content that they have that's lingering out there that they need to address. And so I would tell you, not everything is 100% up to date, but we're getting there. And that actually leads into the next slide pretty well as far as what we're doing. So I mentioned the second one, we're enhancing the content. We're still working on that cleanup. We will take that cleanup a little bit further, meaning that we may start to standardize some formatting and stuff like that, so it feels like a common experience. As you can imagine, over a few decades of collecting this information electronically, it looks varied and different and random. So we might try and clean that up. The other thing for enhancing the content that we're going to be working on is, now that we have some of this information in single repositories, we have the ability to link to it. So information about the drug policy that Kim mentioned, we can now link that to a procedure manual that we are creating for our projects or some of those items. So we can leverage those links that we know will stay static, which is nice, and we can cross-link the content. As far as enhancing access, what we're really looking at doing here is going to mobile. I mentioned the generational shift that we're going through. You can probably understand and appreciate that as a construction company, we're very much out on the site. We have remote locations all over the nation. and mobile access, whether it's on phones, tablets, laptops, or whatever, is huge for us. And so we're really trying to enhance that. ControlCenter does have responsive design, so it can apply to all that those types of devices. We are in the process internally, though, of dealing with our security protocols around that, firewall issues and all those things I leave up to the experts in our IT staff to do. But we are working on trying to create a unified mobile experience, leveraging ControlCenter. So that's one of those next steps that we'll do. And we're also working on the creation of an app so it's easy to access and we can get the security protocols taken care of immediately. The last thing on here is leveraging project-specific content. So Kim had shown you in some of those manual cases and also some of the policies and procedures how we're able to start from a master and create a local copy for a specific project, tailor the information to that project. We did not roll that out initially. Primarily, we held off on that just for change management reasons. We wanted to focus on knowledge from a corporate perspective and then start drilling into some of the details and giving them some of the enhancements and the available features as we go over time. So we're definitely looking to continue to do that. We see a lot of benefit in creating those project-specific versions. Kim mentioned that as we do that, we have the ability to look at those versions and what some of those changes are made over time. And so we can mine some of those changes and apply them to the master so that everybody can benefit from the lessons learned of one team. So that would apply to multiple cases, our QA manuals, our safety manuals, procedure manuals, so on and so forth. So those are kind of what's next for us. It is an ongoing process. With that, I think we're going to start with some questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we do have a few, we had a few questions that have come in. The first one's actually for you, Mike, so I hope you're ready.
Yep, shoot.
So Mike, do you have any tips for companies looking to roll this out or a similar project or application?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is to identify what your needs are in terms of knowledge management. I mentioned that we actually started the process a couple years ago. We worked with all the different departments to truly find out what our needs were. And really what we did is we went through kind of a discovery session. And through that, it was the multiple repositories was our big thing. So out-of-date, lost information that's scattered across the country. And so going through that exercise to truly understand what we need and why we need it was huge for us. That then made it very easy to work with Fishbowl and go through the steps of configuring the system to what we needed, because we had already talked about workflows and security and a lot of that stuff. So that initial discovery session really helped. That would be my biggest tip.
So a follow-on question to that, Mike. So you've done this now. What about the ROI? So do you have plans to measure the ROI of the overall project?
We do. So it's hard to do a direct measure of that. We do have metrics in place, and these are what I'll call more macro metrics that we are looking at. Specifically, we measure the revenue and the profit that we can get per person. And so we were assuming gains with that due to efficiency. So if I have less people because I can onboard them faster, I can find information in a more efficient manner, I should be better with the net profit that I can generate per person. So we do not, there's many factors that go into that. We understand that, we appreciate that. We were not requested by our execs, even though we talked about it a lot, to try and measure a direct ROI for this, but we are measuring it through that macro metric. And then the other one is one I already mentioned. It was our employee survey. Through that, I mentioned some of the comments that were in there. We also were measuring the company's providing resources to the employees. Do they feel like they're taken care of? Do they feel like they have the tools necessary? And so we have numbers on that that are actually metrics in that employee survey of where we're going and what we're doing. So that'll be probably the most direct metric is, are we providing the employees with the resources they need to do their jobs?
Okay, great. A few more questions here. So two-part question here from Judy. So this one's for Kim. What's the minimum WebCenter content version that must be running to implement ControlCenter?
Yep, good question. So this requires version at least 11.118.
And then her follow-up question is, when an owner leaves the company, how hard is it to reassign their content? So if an owner's content is split among multiple people, how would that be handled?
Yep. So there's a couple of ways that we can do it. It's just going to depend a little bit on how you have your ownership set up. So some of our customers use ownership aliases rather than individual owners. So it's really, or multiple owners. So it isn't just assigned to one individual. The other way that we see this handled a lot is through some of the back-end tools that are included with ControlCenter that allow you to do bulk reassignment. So if you needed to go find all the things that were assigned to Kim and reassign them to Jason, you could do it that way as well.
So our backstop for that is the approval process that we have with reviews. So with our gatekeeper, if a review is not done on a specific piece of content by an owner that has left, that ultimately gets escalated to the gatekeeper, and they are the ones that can kick off that batch transition to a new owner that Kim just mentioned. So the gatekeepers are backstop.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So this might actually be a follow-up question to that then. So can you have multiple owners and gatekeepers in ControlCenter?
Yes. So you can have multiple owners. You can also have multiple gatekeepers. What a lot of times we do is set up the gatekeepers as an alias, as a group, and that may be, it may only be a group. It may just be a group with one person, when you initially go live, but it makes it really easy to add multiple people if you need to distribute the load of doing that gatekeeping task to 2 or 3 people or 10 people. You can easily do that. If one of those gatekeepers ever leaves, it makes it really easy to swap someone else in or add another person onto that. So as far as that goes, it's generally how we handle it. But in either case, you can have one or more owners and one or more gatekeepers.
And so even though that's a possibility, I'll just let you know Ryan has chosen essentially to do one owner, one gatekeeper. We do have backups for the gatekeeper, so I don't think we're putting all of our eggs in one basket. But we have selected to go with one. But we may evolve to the solution that Kim just mentioned. We start simple.
Okay, our next question is from Christina. Christina asks, could you demonstrate or explain a little bit more specifically about the differences between WebCenter out-of-the-box functionality and ControlCenter functionality, as well as custom functionality implemented for Ryan? So I think the question really is what's out of the box, what's ControlCenter, and what's custom?
Yep. So WebCenter out of the box is going to provide the underlying document management. It's going to provide the security services, the metadata services, the ability to have fields and set up profiles. It also provides the workflow engine for the solution. ControlCenter is going to provide the user interface. It's also going to provide the ability to have the browse navigation that we showed. It's going to provide the ability to have scheduled reviews. So out of the box, you can have workflow in WebCenter content, but once something gets released, it's released. And so there's no way to say, in a year or in 2 years, I need to review this again. So that's something that ControlCenter adds. We also add some other features with ControlCenter that we didn't necessarily show today. The ability to sync metadata between native documents and have standard headers and footers and push those properties into the document. The ability to do enhanced watermarking. So we did show a little bit of the watermarking that comes out of the box with ControlCenter. Another piece that we didn't really touch on too much today is within ControlCenter, you have a much richer ability to see the workflow history and kind of the review history from an audit or compliance perspective. If you need to be able to go back and report on that, that's something that ControlCenter enhances that you don't really have with WebCenter out of the box without going to a DBA and saying, hey, can you get this out of the database, because there's no way to see it in the UI. As far as what was custom for Ryan, the things that we did 4 custom things for Ryan as part of this project. The first was the look and feel. So if you noticed when I was showing the screenshots, it was kind of a green and gray color scheme out of the box. Blue, so that was kind of a skinning exercise that we did for them. The second was the ability to have that visual navigation. So obviously that navigation flow is something that's very specific to Ryan companies. That was a customization that we did, extending ControlCenter to be able to have that. The third was the ability to have the project and master documents being associated to one another. So within ControlCenter, and I guess I didn't mention this when I was talking about what does ControlCenter add. ControlCenter adds the ability to have associated or linked documents and to also supersede documents. So there's a built-in relationship model there. So as part of this project, we extended that model using the architecture of ControlCenter to be able to extend, and we added on the ability to have project and master documents and maintain them in that way. And then the last thing that we added on was the ability to manage the manuals within ControlCenter.
All right, there are no further questions at this time, so I think we're going to go ahead and conclude the webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for joining. Certainly, if you have further questions, feel free to reach out to us. I'll put the contact information up on the screen. This has been recorded, and so everyone who attended today will get a copy, and I'm certainly happy to answer any further questions if you think about them after the fact.